The last day of the year dawned with a chill mist hanging over the Thames, a pearly gray veil that softened the outlines of bridges and spires. By evening, however, the fog had lifted, and London glittered as though determined to welcome the new year in splendor. My own excitement was not inconsiderable, for I had secured an invitation to what was already being described in the morning papers as the most dazzling event of the season, the Midnight Masquerade at the Savoy Hotel. The Savoy, with its river-facing windows, gilt-edged salons, and famous ballroom, was a sight to behold that evening. Motor cars drew up one after the other in a stately procession. Gentlemen in black tie escorted ladies cloaked in velvet and fox fur, each bearing a mask that promised anonymity and intrigue. The doormen, resplendent in their livery, ushered us into a world of glittering chandeliers, fountains of champagne, and music that seemed to sweep one along on waves of gaiety. I should confess that my presence owed little to my own merits. The invitation had, in fact, been extended to my old friend Hercule Poirot, who had graciously insisted that I accompany him. "Monsieur Hastings," he had said, with that familiar twinkle in his eye, "you must come. These English fates, they are always so instructive. One sees they're the comedy of human nature, played with masks, yet revealing more than it conceals." Poirot himself, though a man of fastidious habits, did not often indulge in such social extravaganzas. Yet on this occasion he had agreed, partly because the hostess, Lady Evelyn Whitcomb, was well known to him by reputation. A widow of considerable means, Lady Evelyn had cultivated a reputation for charm, daring, and if gossip were to be believed, more than one scandal. The prospect of a masquerade under her direction was, I suspect, irresistible to Poirot's sense of the theatrical. The ballroom itself was a wonder that evening. Banks of white lilies and crimson roses framed the great mirrors, while silken draperies fell in folds of sapphire and gold. Masked figures drifted to and fro, their laughter mingling with the strains of a Strauss waltz. Here was a harlequin, there a queen of hearts. One might catch sight of a Roman senator in conversation with a Pierrette, or a domino mask concealing features one could have sworn were familiar. "Observe, Hastings," murmured Poirot, his eyes roving with quiet alertness. "See how the people move, how they watch each other. It is curious, is it not, how the mask frees them, yet also imprisons them? Regard, for example, that lady in the emerald gown. Her gestures, they are of a woman accustomed to admiration. Yet tonight, behind the mask, she seeks to hide something more than her face." I followed his gaze to where a tall woman, unmistakable even in disguise, moved with languid grace among her guests. Lady Evelyn herself. The emerald of her gown shimmered under the lights, and the curve of her lips behind the half-mask suggested amusement touched with mischief. She paused to exchange a word with a portly man in military attire, Colonel Archibald Grant, a figure of some renown from the last war. The colonel, I observed, looked less at ease in his mask than did the lady, his manner stiff, his eyes darting uneasily about the room. Elsewhere, I noted Clara Denham, the rising actress, her delicate figure adorned in silver sequins that caught the light with every step. She laughed a little too brightly at the remarks of Sir Reginald Pembroke, a man whose wealth and influence were matched only by his reputation for ruthlessness in business. Watching them, I felt an odd sense of tension, as though beneath the glittering surface of this company ran currents of rivalry, envy, and perhaps even malice. As the evening wore on, I found myself reflecting on Poirot's earlier remark. There was indeed something fascinating in this mingling of concealment and display. Behind each mask lay a personality, a history, a secret perhaps. And though I could not yet have articulated the thought, there was already in the air that peculiar undercurrent which Poirot always seemed to detect before the rest of us, the sense that beneath gaiety lurked the shadow of something darker. At one point, as the orchestra paused and the crowd rearranged itself for the next dance, Poirot leaned toward me once more. "Remember this evening, Hastings," he said softly. "It is the theater of life, and in such theaters, tragedy waits only for the cue. I laughed uneasily, for though he spoke half in jest, I had learned long ago that Hercule Poirot's instincts were rarely at fault. It was a curious sensation to stand amidst so many familiar figures and yet feel uncertain of who precisely one encountered. Masks, though charming in appearance, seemed to lend each conversation an air of unreality. A voice might sound familiar, a gesture might betray its owner, but the painted domino, the sequined half-face, or the feathered Venetian conceit turned acquaintances into riddles. Lady Evelyn Whitcomb moved with the assurance of a queen among courtiers. Even behind her mask of green, silk edged with gold, she was unmistakable. Her tall frame, her carriage, and her unfailing poise marked her out. She received guests with laughter, her gloved hand alighting upon arms and shoulders with a proprietary air. To some she offered warmth, to others a jest that carried, I thought, a subtle sting. She was, without question, the center of her own creation. "Remark, Hastings," murmured Poirot beside me. "There is always in such a gathering un petite reine, a small queen. Around her, all else revolves. But beware, a queen may also make enemies. N'est-ce pas?" Close at hand, I noticed Colonel Archibald Grant. The colonel, broad of chest, his military bearing only slightly softened by advancing years, wore a crimson mask that concealed his severity. He had once been spoken of as a national hero, though rumors suggested his later investments had gone awry. His manner with Lady Evelyn was marked by a curious blend of admiration and irritation. At times he bent close, his words urgent. At others he drew himself back with visible restraint. Not far away, Sir Reginald Pembroke stood in conversation with a knot of financiers. His mask was the simplest possible, a plain black domino, and yet there was something almost sinister in the way it accentuated his cold, appraising eyes. Sir Reginald was a man of enormous influence in the city, his reputation for crushing rivals as well known as his fortune. He bowed with courtesy to Lady Evelyn when she approached, yet one could see in her answering smile a flicker of mockery. Theirs was not a friendship of equals, but of combatants temporarily at peace. Clara Denham, by contrast, was all brightness. Slender, youthful, her sequined gown of silver clung about her like moonlight upon water. She wore a mask of delicate lace, which scarcely concealed her wide, expressive eyes. She was accompanied by no chaperone that I could see, daring enough for a young actress whose name had lately appeared in gossip columns linked to a certain married gentleman of society. Lady Evelyn greeted her with ostentatious warmth, but I thought I detected in Clara's tone a trace of defensiveness, as though a wound had been lightly touched. Then there was Hugh Mortimer, a fellow I recalled from clubs and card-rooms. Dark-haired, with the easy smile of one accustomed to taking risks, he wore a Poirot mask that seemed to suit his whimsical air. Yet for all his charm, I had often heard him spoken of as reckless, his fortune at the gaming table forever dwindling and replenished by mysterious means. That evening, he laughed with Clara, teased Sir Reginald, and whispered something to Lady Evelyn that drew a peal of laughter from her lips. Still, I could not help feeling his gaiety was a shade too studied, his smile a little too insistent. As Poirot and I observed, others drifted into view. Society matrons in ostrich feathers, young officers resplendent in borrowed finery, a smattering of foreign visitors whose accents carried hints of the continent. Yet it was upon this central circle, Lady Evelyn, the Colonel, Sir Reginald, Clara, and Mortimer, that the true focus of attention seemed to rest. "You note, Hastings," said Poirot, his gaze never still, "how in every company there form the little constellations. Around Lady Evelyn, the stars, they gather. But between those stars there are currents. Ah, yes, currents of attraction and of repulsion. Regard how Mademoiselle Denham turns away when the Colonel approaches. Observe how Sir Reginald, he does not laugh when Monsieur Mortimer speaks. These things, they're most telling." As the orchestra struck up a lively foxtrot, Lady Evelyn swept Clara onto the dance floor with an air of proprietorship. I could not miss the glance that passed between Mortimer and Sir Reginald at that moment. the gambler's mocking grin, the businessman's cold disdain. Meanwhile, the colonel stood apart, his fists clenched at his sides, watching Lady Evelyn with an intensity that betrayed no joy in the festivities. "Do you suppose, Poirot," I asked, "that all this is mere society intrigue? A flirtation here, a quarrel there? After all, one expects a certain measure of tension at such gatherings." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mon ami, you are too English, too charitable. You see only the surface, the polite quarrel. But beneath? Ah, beneath there's often bitterness, despair, or greed. And tonight," he tapped his temple lightly, "tonight, my little gray cells tell me there is drama brewing, one that no mask can forever conceal." I could not help but laugh, though uneasily. I had long ago learned to take Poirot's instincts seriously, however far-fetched they might seem at the time. Yet as the dancers whirled past, as champagne bubbled, as laughter rang out beneath the gilded ceilings of the Savoy, it was difficult indeed to imagine tragedy intruding upon so bright a scene. Still, there lingered, like a faint discordant note beneath the music, a tension I could not altogether ignore. And when the clock struck 10, and the guests toasted one another with renewed gaiety, I thought I caught in Poirot's eye a gleam not of merriment, but of watchfulness, the patient regard of a man who knows that every mask, sooner or later, must be removed. The hours between 10 and midnight have always seemed to me peculiarly treacherous. The company is at its liveliest, the orchestra at its boldest. Yet one senses in the very height of gaiety a strain upon the nerves, as though laughter grows a little brittle and smiles a shade too fixed. That night at the Savoy the effect was pronounced. The masks, once a charming novelty, had begun to chafe. People removed them and put them on again with restless fingers. Fans fluttered. The air, faint with perfume and lilies, grew warm. Poirot, who abhors a crush, had secured for us a vantage point near a gilded pillar for which the ballroom spread like a lake of moving color. From there I saw Lady Evelyn glide amid her guests, her emerald gown throwing back the light in little waves. If she was fatigued, it did not show. Her smile was as sovereign as ever. Yet there was a moment, only a moment, when she turned her head sharply at something spoken by Sir Reginald Pembroke. His bow was correct, his mouth smiling, but his eyes were not. "You perceive, Hastings," murmured Poirot, "the smile that does not reach the eyes is a phenomenon of great interest. Come, let us promenade. It is the hour when the little indiscretions happen, behind palms, upon terraces, in galleries where the music is softer." He touched my sleeve. "We will not intrude, non. We will merely observe." We made a circuit of the room, close by the fountain, a marble nymph pouring a slender thread of water into a shell littered with roses. Stood a tall silver stand laden with empty champagne coupes. Another, on a sideboard, held a regiment of filled glasses awaiting the midnight toasts. The pale wine caught the light and winked wickedly. A waiter passed with a tray of cocktails garnished with a twist of lemon. Another bore tiny pastries that looked too pretty to eat. As we approached the doorway to the inner gallery, a small object upon a velvet settee caught my eye. A mask of black satin, butterfly-shaped, with a pin of paste stones at the temple. A smear of deep plum-colored lipstick stained the inner edge, and there clung to the satin a faint fragrance. Violets, if I am not mistaken. "A lady has put off her face," I remarked, picking it up. Poirot shook his head. "Gently, mon ami. One learns nothing by handling. One learns much by noticing where a thing is left." He pointed with a delicate forefinger to the carpet. "See there, the faint impression of moisture, 2 small drops. And further, a filament of silver thread. Not from the mask. Regard the embroidery of Mademoiselle Denham's gown. It is sewn with the silver. You think, then, I think, Hastings, that Mademoiselle passed this way in agitation. Whether she left the mask, or merely brushed by it, we shall not assert. For the present, we register the possibilities." We moved into the gallery, a long space hung with mirrors and portraits, where the music from the ballroom arrived softened and dreamlike. It was cooler there. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar to the river terrace. Through it came a breath of night air carrying the faint smell of damp stone and the Thames. Voices drifted from the shadows, a woman's, low and strained, a man's, iron-hard. "I do not care for your methods, Pembroke." "Methods?" The man's tone was a thin line of steel. "Your ladyship has lived handsomely upon results. The city is not a drawing room. It will be done as I say." There was a swift rustle. "You forget to whom you speak." "I forget nothing." A pause, then a soft, contemptuous laugh. "The new year will bring an accounting. Do not attempt theatrics, Evelyn. I am oddly immune." I felt myself involuntarily step forward, but Poirot's hand, light and implacable, restrained me. We heard the click of heels. A figure in emerald swept past, composed but very white about the mouth. Sir Reginald followed at leisure, adjusting his cuff-link with fastidious fingers. He glanced at us, bowed coldly, and was gone. "Not a happy conversation," I observed. "None," said Poirot, "but illuminating. Come, another little promenade." He turned us toward the terrace door. The river lay black as slate, flecked with drifting sparks from the lamps along the embankment. Pairs of guests stepped out for air and stepped back again laughing. A fiddler, idling between sets, drew a few melancholy phrases from his instrument, the notes hanging like mist. We had not gone 10 paces when a small scene played itself in a deeper pocket of shadow. Clara Denham stood with Colonel Grant. Even without their masks, the colonel had crushed his irritably in one hand. Clara had none. Their voices were unmistakable. She was pale, her hands clasped tight. He was flushed, his jaw rigid. "Can't bear it, Colonel," she was saying. "I won't be humiliated again." "Then accept good counsel," he returned, too loud for discretion. "Leave off parading yourself before that crowd, and before her. Do you understand me? She invited me, and I have as much right. You have the right to make a spectacle of yourself, if you wish." He bit off the words. "But I will not be made a fool. Not again. Not by Evelyn Wickham, and not by you." Clara gave a little cry, half anger, half something like despair. "You don't know. None of you know what she checked herself, flung her head up, and swept past us, silver skirts whispering." The colonel remained, breathing hard, then set his mask upon his face with fingers that trembled and marched away. I turned to Poirot in some heat. "That was ungentlemanly." "Possibly, but it tells a story, does it not?" His eyes were thoughtful. "It is curious to me that Mademoiselle spoke not of him, but of what she, and then was silent. To whom, I asked myself, does she attribute the humiliation?" We re-entered the ballroom. The orchestra had begun a waltz. The room turned slowly as upon a great wheel. Hugh Mortimer, all insouciant charm, bowed before Lady Evelyn and led her out with a flourish. If she had been disturbed upon the terrace, she gave no sign. She laughed at something Mortimer said, and with a deft movement adjusted his Pierrot ruff. As they passed us, I thought, perhaps imagination, that her hand lingered upon his arm a fraction longer than friendship demanded. During the interval that followed, Poirot drifted toward the musicians. I found him in quiet conversation with the leader, a grave young man with a tidy mustache. "You have the program, monsieur," Poirot was saying. "Yes, so." At 11:30, the interval, at 5 to midnight, the march, at midnight precisely, Auld Lang Syne, and following a brief fanfare to signal the toasts. "Très bien. And arrests?" "You will cease at 11:40, then again at 5 to 12? "Ah, I thank you. What earthly interest can your inquiries into the orchestra's rests have for our evening?" I demanded, amused. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Precision, Hastings. The movements of a crowd are governed by rhythm, the music, and by necessity, the serving of drinks. Where there is rhythm, there is opportunity. At the rest, people talk. At the fanfare, they raise glasses. It is, how do you say, the choreography of chance." I laughed and allowed that he was incorrigible. Yet even as I jested, a small incident drew my attention. A waiter, slight and dark, came from a direction of the sideboard with a single champagne coupe upon a salver. He paused near the fountain and, with a practiced gesture, exchanged it for another, standing among the prepared glasses. His eye flicked left and right. Then he disappeared into the crowd. "Did you see?" I began. "I did," said Poirot softly. "A substitution of one glass for another. It is a thing that happens often at fêtes, mon ami. A jealous lover, a fastidious guest, a host who sends the special vintage to a particular friend. We do not leap to conclusions. We merely add a bead to the rosary." The clock approached 11:30. Conversation swelled, broke, and reformed in eddies. Someone misplaced a feathered mask and accused a neighbor, laughing, of theft. A society matron swept by with a lorgnette at the end of a ribbon, declaring the air villainous. On the settee where the butterfly mask lay, I saw now a tiny glove, left or dropped, of pale kid, the seam at the wrist torn. A dance card, gilt-edged, had slipped between the cushions. The initials upon it were E.W., and beside the midnight dance someone had written, in a small clear hand, R.P., Evelyn and Reginald. I murmured. Poirot regarded the card, then the glove, then the mask, each with the same detached interest. Perhaps yes, perhaps a decoy. There are those who write things that are not true in order that others may stumble upon them and believe. The English, they adore the practical joke. Do you think Lady Evelyn? I think, Hastings, that Lady Evelyn has made many arrangements this evening. Some are social. Others, he lifted a shoulder. We shall see. Near the doors to the foyer, a little knot had formed around Mortimer, whose wit had evidently been in high feather. He saluted us with his glass. "Hastings, Monsieur Poirot, you must come. Lady Evelyn proposes a game of Guess the Guest. Masks on, names off, stakes a bottle of her particular champagne to the winner. A game of misidentification," said Poirot mildly. "How droll." Lady Evelyn's voice floated over her shoulder. "You shall play, Poirot, you must. I promise you no one will deceive you, unless you wish to be deceived." She laughed, and, as the company obliged, she lowered her own mask again. For an instant, the emerald and the satin and the light conspired to show her face in half-profile, splendid, willful, a trifle hard. The game was laughter and mischief, but under it worked a sharper current. Twice, hands fumbled with glasses. Once, someone brushed my sleeve, and I caught again the scent of violets. When the orchestra struck its fanfare at 5 minutes to the hour, there was a little surge. Glasses summoned, couples pressed together, waiters gliding. I saw Sir Reginald at Lady Evelyn's side, his mouth set, the colonel hovering, uncertain, Clara denim pale and bright-eyed, Mortimer smiling, always smiling. Poirot stood very still. "Do you feel it?" he said softly. "Feel what?" "The hush before the curtain falls. And then he lifted a finger. Then the next curtain rises." Midnight was a breath away. Somewhere near the terrace doors a draught stirred the lilies. The fountain's thread of water made a silver sound like a whisper. Masks were tilted, glasses lifted. 100 faces turned toward the great clock above the musician's dais. 10, 9, 8. I glanced at Poirot. His eyes were upon the silver stand of waiting coupes. 3, 2, 1. The room flung itself upon the new year with a roar. Above the river the first rocket flowered, white upon black. And in the jubilation, laughter, kisses, embraces, I had the oddest sensation that, somewhere behind the noise, a very small thing had happened. Something precise, deliberate, so slight that one might have missed it entirely. I did not, nor I knew did Poirot. The instant of the new year was tumult itself. Confetti rained like colored snow, streamers curled through the air, and the orchestra burst into Auld Lang Syne as though it were a battle hymn. Hands clasped hands, glasses clinked, and the Savoy's ballroom became a whirl of laughter, kisses, and champagne. Fireworks thudded and flared against the black sky beyond the tall windows, casting the scene in alternating hues of crimson and silver. I confess I was swept up in the spirit. One cannot resist the contagion of such celebration. I sang the words with the rest, my hand caught in Mortimer's jovial grasp on one side and Clara Denham's trembling fingers on the other. Poirot, ever precise, hummed softly but did not join in, his eyes darting with a curious intensity about the room. And then it happened. A sound rose above the merriment. A cry. Not the jubilant shout of the crowd, but a sharp, startled exclamation that cut across the music like a blade. I turned instinctively. Near the great fountain, where champagne glasses still stood in serried ranks, Lady Evelyn Wickham had staggered. Her emerald gown shimmered strangely in the light as her gloved hand flew to her throat. She swayed once, twice. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered upon the marble floor. Then, with a grace horribly at odds with the reality, she collapsed beside the fountain, her mask askew, her face pale against the dark water and crimson roses. For a second the crowd thought it some jest, a lady overcome with excitement. There was a ripple of laughter, quickly stilled as she lay, unmoving. Someone shrieked. The orchestra faltered and broke off. The fireworks outside went on oblivious, crackling in the night sky. "Clear the way. Make space, if you please," cried Poirot, his voice cutting like a whip through the confusion. He was at her side in an instant, kneeling with fastidious care, touching nothing he need not. I, more clumsy, pushed back the curious throng, shouting for air, for water, for a doctor. But even before help could be summoned, Poirot had glanced once at the fallen glass, once at the faint smear upon Lady Evelyn's lips, and given a small, grave shake of his head. "It is not the faint, Hastings," he murmured. "It is death, sudden, but not natural." The ballroom had fallen silent save for the crackle of fireworks and the faint drip of water from the fountain. Faces stared in horror. Sir Reginald, rigid, his glass still raised. Colonel Grant, his jaw slack, fists clenched. Clara Denham, her silver mask crushed in her trembling hands. Mortimer, pale beneath his paint, but still with that incredulous smile fixed like a mask of its own. The waiter who had carried the champagne tray a moment before stood frozen, eyes wide, the salver slipping dangerously in his grasp. "Messieurs, mesdames." Poirot rose and spread his arms with calm authority. "You will please remain where you are. The doors, they must be secured. No one is to depart until we have summoned the proper authorities." There was a murmur of protest, swiftly quelled by the gravity of his tone. The hotel manager, white with shock, hurried to obey. Servants drew the doors closed. The sound of bolts sliding home echoed through the hushed room. I bent over Lady Evelyn. Her face, lovely still but already strangely waxen, bore the unmistakable signs, the faint bluish tinge at the lips, the convulsive spasm of the throat. "Poirot, poison?" I whispered. "Assuredly. Observe the glass. It is not chipped, yet there is a film, an odor faint but acrid. One needs only the smallest quantity of certain preparations, colorless, tasteless. In champagne, Hastings, it disappears as snow in the river." The crowd pressed closer again. Poirot turned with a flash of irritation. "Messieurs, mesdames, have you no respect? Stand back, I beg of you. Death is among us, and it is not decent to gape." A few retreated, abashed. Others remained transfixed, horror-struck. Sir Reginald Pembroke was the first to speak with icy precision. "This is monstrous. Lady Evelyn has enemies, yes, but murder here? In public?" Colonel Grant's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "Poison, good God! And in her glass? Then one of us." He broke off, staring about him as though each face might conceal a killer. Clara Denham, her eyes enormous above her pale cheeks, whispered. She was drinking only minutes ago. I saw her raise her glass, with Sir Reginald beside her. Pembroke turned on her with fury. "You dare? Enough." Poirot's command stilled the exchange. His gaze traveled deliberately from face to face. At midnight, each one here raised a glass. Each one drank, but only one glass carried death. Who placed it in the hand of Lady Evelyn? That is what we must discover. The silence that followed was terrible. Outside, another rocket burst and died in fragments of gold. Within, the glittering ballroom seemed suddenly tawdry, the lilies and roses oppressive with their heavy scent. Poirot bent once more and adjusted the fallen mask with a curious gentleness. Masks. Hastings, he said softly, so that only I heard. They conceal, yes, but also they reveal. Remember that. Then, straightening, he addressed the guests once more. Messieurs, mesdames, this night of festivity has become a night of inquiry. Hercule Poirot will ask questions, and you will answer them. For among you, hidden by the mask, but betrayed by the truth, is the hand that delivered death. And as his words fell into the heavy silence, the great clock struck 12 and 5 minutes, each toll echoing like a hammer blow. What had been a palace of light became, in an instant, a chamber of echoes. The petals around the fountain looked indecently bright. The mirrors, which a moment before had multiplied gaiety, now only reflected pale, stricken faces. The hotel manager, Mr. Hartwell, a small, urbane man reduced to monosyllables, darted forward, wringing his hands. "Telephone Scotland Yard," said Poirot quietly. "State that there has been a death at the Savoy and that Hercule Poirot requests an officer of experience. Until the police arrive, these doors do not open. No guest departs. No servant leaves his station. You, monsieur, will place 2 reliable porters at each exit, and bring me a clean linen cloth, several empty tumblers, and a small tray." Hartwell fled to obey. Poirot's authority, like a bell struck in fog, gave the panic a shape. People ceased to mill and took direction. The orchestra, uncertain, laid down their instruments and sat in chastened silence. Somewhere a lady began to sob. Elsewhere, a man swore softly and asked forgiveness immediately after, as though profanity might disturb the dead. Poirot beckoned me. "Hastings, we make order from disorder. First, the glasses. Those upon the silver stand, do not let a finger touch them. They are our chorus of possibilities. This 1 inch," he indicated the coupe that had fallen from Lady Evelyn's hand, now resting in a linen napkin he himself had placed, "is our soloist. Regard the rim, a lipstick, deep plum. Observe, too, the faint odor. Yes? Violet de Parme. And note, Lady Evelyn's own mouth is tinted a coral shade, not plum." He lifted his eyes to mine. "Already, a contradiction sings. You mean the poisoned glass may not have been hers originally?" "Exactment. We shall not proclaim. We shall record." By now Hartwell had returned with cloth, tumblers, and a steward. Poirot set about his arrangements with fastidious care, lining 4 clean glasses along a side table and decanting with a measured hand the dregs from Lady Evelyn's shattered coupe into one, and a few drops from 3 of the waiting coupes into others. He covered each with a saucer. Later, the chemist will speak. For the present, we listen to sight and scent. "Sir," said Hartwell in a strained undertone, "the police have been sent for. Must we, keep the guests confined in the ballroom?" "For the moment, yes. But bring here." Poirot surveyed the room with a slow sweep. Sir Reginald Pembroke, Colonel Archibald Grant, Mademoiselle Clara Denham, and Monsieur Hugh Mortimer. Also the waiter who lately served the champagne from a separate salver. The young Italian? Carlo. Tres bien. And one thing more. There is, I think, a cloakroom near the foyer. How watched. No one retrieves or deposits any article until I give permission. Within minutes they came, the management's deference herding power and panic into a small knot by the fountain. Sir Reginald arrived first, rigid and controlled, every hair in place, a black domino mask now pushed up like a visor upon his brow. Colonel Grant followed, shoulders squared as though to parade, but his eyes bloodshot and unsettled. Clara Denham came pale and resolute, her lace mask crumpled in her hand. The sequins of her gown trembled with her breath. Mortimer sauntered last, the Poirot grin painted upon his face at odds with the pallor beneath. Carlo the waiter hovered near the silver stand, clutching his salver with a doomed air. Poirot inclined his head to the group with grave courtesy. "Messieurs, mademoiselle, we shall be very brief, very exact, one at a time, and you will permit that I interrupt if I desire a detail more cleanly stated. Monsieur Carlo, first, your movements at the hour before midnight." Carlo swallowed. "Signore, I serve from the sideboard. At 11:40, we fill the coupes for midnight, how you say, en masse. At 5 before, Mr. Hartwell asks that we bring extra to the fountain for the toast. I go with one, then return for another. Many hands, very busy, signore. Who asked you to take a single glass upon the salver earlier, apart from those upon the stand? Poirot's voice was silk over steel. I saw you exchange one for another. Carlo's eyes flashed in alarm. Ah, scusi, special request. A gentleman asks that a certain coupe be kept for Lady Evelyn. Her particular vintage, he says. I do as told. I place it at the front. Which gentleman? Carlo faltered, then gestured helplessly. Many masks, signore. Sir Reginald's mouth drew into a line. This is preposterous. No such instruction was given by me. I did not say it was you, sir, Carlo murmured abased. Nevertheless, Poirot interposed. It is a thing that can be proved or disproved. We proceed. Sir Reginald, your last conversation with Lady Evelyn? He met Poirot's gaze squarely. It was private, but murder is public. The subject, a business matter soon to be concluded. He gave a chill smile. Lady Evelyn was a spirited investor. We differed on strategy, yet your name appears beside her midnight dance. I produced the gilt-edged card I had found lodged in the settee cushions. He glanced at it and shrugged. She enjoyed theatrics. It meant nothing. You did not drink with her at the stroke. I raised my glass, as did everyone. I did not hand one to her, if that is your implication. Poirot merely bowed and turned to Clara. Mademoiselle Denham, your movements from 11:30 to midnight. Clara's throat worked. I danced, first with Mr. Mortimer, then with a friend. I went to the gallery for air. I felt faint. Lady Evelyn joined the circle at the doors shortly before midnight. I did not speak to her. Your mask of black satin, the butterfly, was it yours? Poirot lifted the very mask I had earlier seen upon the settee, now curiously migrated to the fountain's marble ledge. Clara's eyes widened. Yes, I must have left it on the settee. I never. How did it come here? And your lipstick, may I? Poirot's politeness was absolute. She hesitated, then surrendered a small silver tube. He uncapped it, sniffed, and nodded faintly. A shade of plum, with a violet base? NSC pas. It's a theatrical brand, she said defensively. Many actresses wear it. Just so. Colonel Grant spoke with brusque misery. If you are about to imply that, Miss Denham. I imply nothing, Colonel. I asked. And you, monsieur, the last quarter hour? I spoke to Lady Evelyn. We quarreled. The admission was blunt. She made sport of me, he broke off. I went to the terrace to get hold of myself. I drank nothing at midnight. You abstained. I had no appetite for champagne. Yet you stand here with a glass in your hand, Sir Reginald observed, with a small venom. Grant looked at the coupe, as if surprised to see it there. A waiter pressed it upon me after the cry. I had not touched it. Poirot took it gently, set it with the others, and covered it. Merci. And you, Monsieur Mortimer? Mortimer's cheer looked brittle. I danced, I laughed. I toasted the year with our poor hostess at my elbow. She teased me for my Pierrot, said melancholy clowns were her weakness. That is all. You did not leave her side at the fanfare. I moved to fetch her a fresh glass when the first one slipped. I believe Sir Reginald was nearer the stand than I. Sir Reginald's head came up. I did not fetch any glass for Lady Evelyn. Someone did, said Poirot mildly. For the hand that delivered the glass delivered death. Hartwell, returning, cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, this was found in the ladies' retiring room just now, upon the marble by the washstand. He held, on a doily with the reverence of a sacristan, a tiny cut crystal phial without label. Its stopper was missing. It smelt faintly of almonds and something medicinal. A chill moved over me. Good Lord! Poirot held it to the light, then to his nose, but did not let the glass touch his skin. Interesting. Empty, he said softly. And yet, if our murderer were unskilled, would he abandon such a thing in the obvious place? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. We keep an open mind. Clara's voice came small. Could not be a scent bottle? Almond. Many scents have it. Many, Poirot agreed. And some poison smell of bitter almond also. The chemist will enlighten us." He set the file beside the covered tumblers and returned, with a small frown, to the fountain's rim. There, half hidden by the roses, lay a tiny glove of pale kid, the twin of the one I had earlier noticed on the settee. The wrist seam was torn. "Evelyn's size?" I ventured. Poirot compared discreetly with the hand of the dead. "Non. Smaller. And the tear, new." He placed it with the other exhibits. "We have Hastings, the dance car that ties Lady Evelyn to Sir Reginald, a glove that belongs to a smaller hand, a mask that has flown like a butterfly from settee to fountain, a lipstick that is not the shade upon the lips of the dead, and a file that may be scent or may be murder. Also, our little timetable of music and the testimony that a single coupe was reserved. It is a puzzle of choreography. Sir Reginald's self-control frayed. Are we to be detained until dawn while you philosophize over masks and gloves?" "Only until the police arrive," said Poirot, unruffled. "And then, if I'm not mistaken, a little longer." His eyes went for a flicker to Carlo. "One last question. Who told you the glass was for Lady Evelyn?" Carlo moistened his lips. I cannot say his name, signore. I only remember the mask, plain black. Sir Reginald's own domino, still writing his brow, seemed to darken. From a far end of the ballroom came the first stir that announced the arrival of authority. Uniformed men moving through the suddenly respectful crowd, a detective's plain hat in the hand. Poirot gathered his small array upon the tray, covered it neatly, and handed it to me. "Guard these, Hastings, as you would your life. There is one thing more that does not please me." "What is that?" He looked toward the silver stand of coupes and the fountain's marble lip. "A glass is missing that should be present, and a person present who wished very much to be missing." Before I could press him, the yard reached our circle, and the formal machinery of the law began to turn. The officers from the yard arrived with that peculiar blend of bustle and gravity which, once seen, is never forgotten. Hats were removed, notebooks appeared, a cordon was established with quiet efficiency. The revelers, transformed into detainees by the mere presence of authority, subsided into subdued groups under the chandeliers, their masks now ridiculous relics of a gaiety already unbelievable. The senior man introduced himself as Inspector Sharp, a well-knit fellow with an expression of dry patience and a habit of listening harder than he spoke. He acknowledged Poirot with a brief inclination of the head which, I fancied, conceded much more than his words. "Mr. Poirot," he said, "will take charge, if you please." Though, his eye took in the array of covered tumblers by the side table. "I see you've done some of our work for us." Poirot's bow was delicate. "Only to preserve what is perishable, Inspector. Death here is an improvisation in a crowded theater. One must save the properties from eager hands." He indicated the linen-covered tray I held. "The exhibits, they're small, but they speak." Sharp set a constable by the tray and turned to Mr. Hartwell. "Closes doors, yes. Names, addresses later. For now, for persons to a side salon. Those Mr. Poirot has indicated, and no one is to remove so much as a hairpin." His gaze returned to Poirot. "You'll walk me through it in sequence." Poirot did so in his unfussy way. The fanfare at 5 to the hour, the surge to the silver stand, the single salver separately managed, the cry, the fall. "We have here," he concluded, "a choreography timed to seconds." Sharp grunted. "Seconds, is it? Right? Then we must make a clock of it." He signaled to a constable. "Musicians, leader, please." When a young bandleader approached, Sharp consulted the program, cross-checking quietly. Rest at 11:40. Ready again at 55. Fanfare precisely at 57 by the hall's clock. Auld Lang Syne on the stroke. "We match the timings," said Poirot, satisfied. "And we match the movements to the timings." A porter arrived with a small lacquered evening clutch, emerald morocco, Lady Evelyn's initials in gold. Hartwell proffered it on a folded napkin. Poirot glanced once at Sharp. The inspector hesitated the span of a breath, then nodded. "Go on, Mr. Poirot, careful." Using his handkerchief, Poirot released the clasp. Inside lay those small, intimate things which stab the heart after death. A monogrammed handkerchief faintly tinted coral, a train ticket stub, a tiny gilt pencil, a key upon a silk ribbon, and a folded sheet of cheap typing paper. Poirot unfolded it with 2 fingers. The note was brief, all in capitals, the sort of work one associates with a portable machine. Midnight, by the fountain, bring the transfer. Or her name goes to the papers. A black butterfly will guide you. R. The word transfer had been struck unevenly. The letter R was slightly chipped at the upper serif. There was a small communal intake of breath. Sharp's pencil scratched once. Who's her? Possibly, said Poirot, very mild, Mademoiselle Clara Denham. You observe the papers and the black butterfly, the mask we found first upon the settee, later by the fountain. Also, Lady Evelyn's coral lipstick differs from the plum with violets upon the poisoned rim. He lifted the silver tube Clara had surrendered earlier. It would be crude to leap. Therefore, we shall not leap. Sharp took the note, examined the cheap fiber. Stationer's common stuff. Portable machine, chipped R. Will sweep the hotel typewriters, if any, check offices. He glanced at Hartwell, who blanched. Moi, murmured Poirot. I am more interested in the instruction to meet at the fountain and the deliberate publicity of the hour. At midnight one may touch a glass openly, yes? The theater covers the overt act. We moved again to the silver stand. Poirot's eyes ran along the glittering ranks with the air of a man counting cards at a gaming table. You remarked, Hastings, he said softly, earlier, a small thing. I too. Look, you have a long line of coupes prepared. Between the 3rd and the 4th, is it not? There is one fewer than the symmetry suggests. I stared. Even among 100 glasses, the gap, once seen, would not be unseen. But surely someone has. Removed one, completed Poirot, either before the toasts, to be used, or after, to be hidden. Inspector, might your men search the obvious and the not-so-obvious, behind palms, under draperies, beneath the lip of the fountain? Sharp dispatched 2 constables. Within minutes came a call from behind a bank of lilies. A constable emerged, red-eared and triumphant, with a coupe wrapped in a hotel serviette. Upon its rim was a delicate crescent, coral lipstick unmistakably lighter than the plum we had seen. Lady Evelyn's shade, I breathed. Perhaps, said Poirot, or one who wished it to appear so. He sniffed the glass with the care of a sommelier. Champagne, untampered, I think. He turned to Sharp. Consider the sequence. Evelyn places her own glass down moments before midnight, is drawn into greeting, and is handed another. Her particular vintage, by a waiter under instruction from a man in a plain black mask. She drinks from a second. Death follows. Sharp's eye shifted to Sir Reginald, whose domino, pushed up like a visor, still rode his brow. The tycoon bore the scrutiny without blinking. Inspector, he said with chilly precision, plain black masks were a penny a dozen this evening. Just so, Sir Reginald, said Sharp. We'll find which penny fits. Poirot had moved to the fountain. He crouched, peering between cut roses to the brass lip of the marble shell where the water fell. Ah! He indicated, with his nail, a tiny snag of pale kid caught in a minute irregularity. Our torn glove. It tore here, not in the settee. The person leaned over, carelessly, in haste, perhaps to retrieve or deposit. The seam went, with a small, sharp sound. He straightened and, with elaborate courtesy, addressed Clara. Mademoiselle, may one inquire whether your glove bears such a tear? A flush rose beneath her pallor. She produced her gloves from a beaded reticule with hands that trembled. One was perfect, the other torn at the wrist. I must have caught it earlier, she faltered. In the gallery, on a nail. There is no nail in the gallery, said Poirot, gently. Only mirrors and velvet cord. But here, by the fountain, yes. It is nothing, only a signpost. Colonel Grant took a step forward. If this interrogation is to become a persecution. Patience, Colonel, Sharp murmured without looking up. We're drawing lines, not tying nooses. Hugh Mortimer's painted grin had begun to look ghastly. If a lady's glove tore near the fountain, it proves precisely nothing. We all crowded there at midnight. Even I, melancholy clown as I am. Indeed, Monsieur Mortimer, said Poirot, suddenly bright. In your cloakroom ticket, you were, I think, eager to retrieve a wrap immediately after the cry. Mortimer's hand went, involuntarily, to his pocket. Sharp's eyebrow ticked. May we see it, sir? With an air of injured innocence, Mortimer produced a small pasteboard square, number 73. Sharp nodded to a constable. Moments later the man returned with a black opera cloak. In the inner pocket was nothing more sinister than a crumpled program and a cigarette case, but the lining bore a faint dusting of white crystals, as though from a careless spill. Salt, Mortimer said too quickly. From the oysters. Perhaps, said Sharp, noncommittal. He tapped the cigarette case. Inside lay 3 Egyptian cigarettes, and, tucked behind the paper lining, a matchbook from a small club in St. James's, one with a discreet emblem of a butterfly upon it. Fashionable, Mortimer drawled, recovering his poise. Half London dines there. Half London, repeated Poirot. Yet the emblem, it returns butterfly, butterfly. Sharp turned the portable note over again. A black butterfly will guide you. Could be an instruction to watch Miss Denham. Could be the writer's small joke. Could be a blind. We'll take the typeface impression back to the yard. Poirot, who had been contemplating the silver stand again, lifted one coupe between finger and thumb and studied the foot. Inspector, see here, on several of these glasses the polisher's cloth has left a swirl. Ordinary. But on one there is a different trace, a print where a finger touch then was wiped in haste. And there, catch it obliquely, the slightest scrape upon the stem, as though it had once borne a paper collar. A label, said Sharp. Or a reservation tag, said Poirot. For Lady Evelyn. A waiter instructed. Yes. He glanced at Carlo. The young man nodded miserably. Signore, I am told. This one, front, Madame Evelyn. I'll make the change when I bring more. By whom? Carlo swallowed. A gentleman in the plain black mask. Tall. The voice, educated. Sir Reginald's laugh was extremely slight. You're describing half my club. At present, said Sharp evenly, we prefer halves to nobodies. Poirot's finger hovered above the lined-up tumblers on my tray. We have 3 scents here, Inspector. Plum violet upon the poisoned rim. Coral discovered on the hidden glass. And the faintest trace of cologne upon a third, the stopper of which, if my nose does not betray me, smells of bitter almond from the little phial. Is an over-arranged bouquet. Murderers who are not cold-blooded artists make too many arrangements. Sharp looked up, interested. Meaning, said Poirot, that the obvious story, jealous actress, violet lipstick blackmail over her name, has been pushed before us as roughly as a newspaper. The note waves are in our faces. The dance card shouts RP beside midnight. The butterfly flutters obligingly from settee to fountain. The glove tears at the very lip where the glass was lifted. It is all true, and too true. Clara's lips parted. You think someone has used me? Poirot's look was gentle. I think, mademoiselle, that someone used everything. Your mask, your shade, your humiliation, knowing the English imagination would do the rest. From the terrace doors came a faint draught. The lilies stirred and shed a petal upon the marble. The orchestra, dismissed, packed away their instruments with subdued motions. The great clock ticked on, indifferent. Sharp shut his notebook. We'll separate the principals. Sir Reginald, Grant, Miss Denham, Mr. Mortimer, one at a time, in the small gold salon. Mr. Poirot, you'll be present? But certainly, said Poirot. We will ask the questions of time and position. Who stood to left? Who to right? Who turned away at the fanfare? Who placed a hand where none should be? And presently, his eyes went for a mere instant to the typewritten R. We shall ask the question of machines and men. Machines? I repeated, puzzled. Typewriters, mon ami, said Poirot. Each has its little defect, its signature, even as men have their manner. The letter R, he pinched air delicately, is a very small mustache out of place. He looked back toward the fountain, where roses lay like spent fireworks about the fallen emerald. Masks conceal, arrangements distract, but pattern remains. And the pattern inspector begins to simplify. Good, said Sharp, because my patience prefers simple. But even as he spoke, a constable came at a run from the foyer, saluting breathlessly. Begging your pardon, sir, cloakroom attendant says a lady tried to pass him. Insisted on a rap, wouldn't give a name. When refused, she slipped away back into the crowd. Sharp's face sharpened. Description: small, dark hair, silver gown. We all turned, but the crowd was once more a maze of color and whisper. Only Poirot did not move. Do not pursue, Inspector, he said calmly. The little bird will flutter again. For the present, the little gray cells will work. We will count the beats between fanfare and toast. We will weigh a glass. We will smell a scent. And we will ask why a letter with her wishes so hard to be taken for Reginald. His gaze traveled, not to Sir Reginald, nor to Clara, nor to the Colonel, nor to Mortimer, but to the orchestra dais, as if the memory of a bar of music had spoken to him. And I, who know him, felt the hair stir upon my neck. For that look meant that Poirot had seen not merely a clue, but the shape behind the clues, the movement of a hidden hand. By the time dawn's first light touched the Thames, the glitter of the Savoy had become a gilded cage. Guests huddled in clusters, whispering over lukewarm coffee served by subdued waiters. Constables moved through the salons with steady persistence, noting names, addresses, and recollections. Inspector Sharp remained calm at the center of it all, but I could see he was glad to yield the intricacies of interpretation to Poirot. We had withdrawn to the Gold Salon, a quieter chamber adjoining the ballroom, where a fire sputtered in the grate and gilt mirrors reflected our weary faces. Upon a side table, neatly arranged by Poirot's own hand, lay the exhibits: the torn glove, the butterfly mask, the lipstick tube, the phial of almond-scented liquid, and 2 champagne glasses bearing their telltale stains. Poirot regarded them with the solemnity of a priest before relics. You see, Hastings, here we have what I call an Symphonie trop bien orchestrée. It is too neat, too arranged. One could almost believe a dramatist had stage-managed each clue for an audience's benefit. Inspector Sharp gave a dry cough. Meaning someone planted false leads? Mais oui. Consider. Lady Evelyn's lips were coral, yet the poisoned rim bore plum. Conveniently, Mademoiselle Denham wears plum. The torn glove appears in the very place where the fatal glass was exchanged. And what did we find among Lady Evelyn's things? A slip of paper, typed and signed, threatening exposure and instructing her to meet by the fountain at midnight. It spoke of scandal, of a woman's name, and ended with the single initial R. Sharp's brows rose. R for Reginald Pembroke, you mean? Or so we are invited to believe, said Poirot softly. But note, the typewriter's letter R bore a distinct imperfection, as if chipped at the upper serif. Such little mechanical blemishes are as individual as handwriting. When we find the machine, we shall know more. Until then, we must treat the message as an arrangement designed to point the finger in a particular direction. I shifted uneasily, but surely Sir Reginald had the strongest quarrel with Lady Evelyn. We overheard them ourselves. True, and yet, mon ami, guilt does not always rest with the most obvious adversary. Consider also Colonel Grant. He quarreled bitterly, yes, but his soldier's temper is straightforward. Poison is not his weapon. Monsieur Mortimer? Ah, he smiles too much, and we have seen crystals in his cloak, a matchbook with the butterfly emblem of that dubious club. Suspicious, yes, but is he capable of so elaborate a staging? He turned then to Clara Denham, who sat pale but composed in an armchair, her sequin gown dulled by fatigue. She had been permitted to remain while the others were questioned separately, a fact that had raised eyebrows, though Poirot insisted. Mademoiselle, he said gently, this business of the black butterfly, it was a cruel trick. Your mask became a signpost in another's plot. Tell me, had Lady Evelyn power to harm you in the papers? Clara's voice shook. Yes, she knew things about a past contract, about a gentleman whose name should never have been linked with mine. She threatened to ruin me if I defied her. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I did not poison her. I wished her gone, perhaps. I'm not proud to say it, but not in this way. Poirot inclined his head gravely. I believe you, mademoiselle. You are young. Your drama is on the stage, not in murder. At that moment, a constable entered bearing a tray. Upon it lay a sheaf of typewritten menus from the hotel office. Poirot selected one at random, held it to the light, and smiled faintly. As I thought, the hotel's machine produces a perfect R. So the note we found was not written here. Inspector Sharp tapped his pencil. Then someone brought it ready, planned it in advance. Precisely. And mark this. The words were calculated to direct suspicion. The letter sought to entangle Sir Reginald and to implicate Clara simultaneously. That, Inspector, is the work of a careful mind, one who understands how easily appearances deceive. I could not resist interjecting. Then who, Poirot? If not Pembroke, not Clara, not the Colonel, not Mortimer. Who remains? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, Hastings. We must ask, who had both proximity to the glasses and knowledge of timing? Who knew precisely when the orchestra would pause, when the toast would be raised, when confusion would cover substitution? Who, in short, could choreograph an entire room to the beat of a clock? I stared blankly until my mind caught up. The musicians? Poirot smiled. Exactment, or one connected with them. The orchestra rests gave the window. The fanfare concealed the act. Recall that I questioned the leader about his program. Such details are not trivial. They are the rhythm of crime. Inspector Sharp leaned forward. And you have someone in mind? Poirot raised a finger. Not yet for the accusation. The little gray cells must complete their dance. But I promise you, before the sun is high, we shall unmask the hand behind Lady Evelyn's death. And when we do, you will see how the very masks, meant to conceal, betrayed the guilty. He rose then, small and immaculate, and gestured toward the fountain where, even now, roses wilted in the cooling air. Come, Inspector, we shall reconvene the suspects. It is time to clear the stage of shadows. For the next act approaches, and it will be the last. Gray light crept through the river windows and turned the gilt of the ballroom a wan, exhausted color. The lilies hung their heads. The confetti looked like damp paper scraps after a storm. Inspector Sharp gathered the principals beneath the great clock, and Poirot, immaculate as at the first hour, took his place upon the dais as though about to address a drawing-room audience. Messrs, mademoiselle, he began gently, we have had a masquerade within a masquerade. The true disguise this evening was not silk nor satin, but arrangement. Someone arranged a story for us to believe. It pointed at Mademoiselle Denham with her violet plum lipstick and her butterfly mask. It pointed at Sir Reginald with a threatening note that ended upon his initial. It even teased us with Colonel Grant's temper and wounded pride. It was very pretty. It was also, how do you say, overdone. Clara sat very still, hands interlaced tightly in her lap. Sir Reginald's jaw set. The Colonel stared fixedly at the fountain. Mortimer smiled, pale. Poirot inclined his head. Let us count first the beats of the crime. At 5 minutes to midnight, the orchestra sounded its fanfare. There was a surge toward the silver stand. At that moment, a glass, one reserved by instruction, stood at the front. A waiter was told, by a tall gentleman in a plain black mask, to keep this coupe for Lady Evelyn. When the toast began, another hand lifted it to her. Inspector Sharp's pencil hovered. And whose hand was that, Mr. Poirot? One who had taken the trouble, said Poirot softly, to hide Lady Evelyn's own glass. The one with coral lipstick behind the lilies. One who had smeared the rim of the reserve coupe with plum so that suspicion should run to a particular lady. One who had borrowed that very shade from the inside of a certain butterfly mask. See, Inspector, the faint drag mark upon the satin where the stain is thinned. One who had written a typed message bidding Lady Evelyn come to the fountain with a transfer, knowing that the letter R and the words "the papers" would cast our eyes upon Sir Reginald and upon a young actress whose name has lately amused gossip. Sir Reginald's nostrils flared. If you propose to hint, I propose to exclude you, Sir Reginald, said Poirot mildly. You are a man who allows others to do your unpleasant work. You would not stand in a crush to swap a glass with your own hand. Besides, he tapped the inspector's sheaf. The hotel's typewriters make a perfect R. The chipped one used for the note lives elsewhere. And now we ask, who had an interest in obtaining money quickly? Who is practiced in debt? Who lives by his wits and understands the cover of crowd? Who carried, inside his cloak, a dusting of white crystals? Not from oysters, I think, Inspector, but from a compound which in the tiniest quantity brings about a swift, convulsive death. Who possessed a matchbook from a certain St. James's Club whose emblem, how droll, is the butterfly. Mortimer's smile stiffened. These are airy constructions, Monsieur Poirot. Then we add weight, said Poirot, and his hand turned lightly, as if placing a final card. The cloakroom attendant remembers you, Monsieur Mortimer. At 11:40, when the band rested, you asked if there was a spare plain black domino mask for a jest. He lent you one. At 11:50, our band leader tells me, you approached him to ask, laughing, the precise moment of the fanfare and the stroke. So I may time my toast to perfection, you said. And Carlo, poor Carlo, was instructed by a tall gentleman with an educated voice, wearing that plain black mask, to reserve Madame Evelyn's particular coupe at the front of the stand. He did not know your face, but he knew your voice when I had you speak the same 2 words in his ear just now. Mortimer's hand, which had been idle on the back of a chair, closed slowly until the knuckles whitened. Poirot's voice went very gentle. You smiled, mon cher Poirot, because you meant to smile last. You meant to blackmail, to secure a transfer before Lady Evelyn threw you off, and to throw the blame upon a jealous girl and a convenient R. But the pattern betrayed you. You overranged. You made 3 perfumes where one would do. You planted a phial in the ladies' room. An absurdity. You moved a mask twice and left, upon the stem of the reserve glass, the faint scrape of a paper collar you had cut from a place card to mark it for the waiter. The little things, they are everything. Inspector Sharp said, quite levelly, do you charge Hugh Mortimer with the murder of Lady Evelyn Wickham? Mortimer drew a breath, let it out, and attempted a laugh that found no echo. Charge whatever you please. You've tricks and talismans, gloves and scraps, and scented nonsense. You have no proof that. Mais si, said Poirot softly. We have time. Between the fanfare and the stroke, there were 180 seconds. In that interval you left Lady Evelyn's side to fetch a fresh glass. You went not to the stand, but halfway, stopped, hid her coral-marked coupe behind the lilies, lifted the reserved one, whose rim you had smeared earlier at the settee with plum from the butterfly mask. You returned with it. She drank. And you immediately turned away on the pretext of greeting a friend, so that you would not be the one in her eye when death struck. Carlo will say you made the instruction. The attendant will say you borrowed the black mask. The bandleader will say you timed the music. And Poirot's eyes rested, merciless and sorrowful together. The chemist will say the crystals in your cloak lining are of a kind that kill. There was a long stillness. The river murmured beyond the glass. Somewhere, a spoon chimed faintly against a cup. Mortimer's painted smile wavered and dropped, as though the mask truly slid from his face. She would have ruined me, he said hoarsely. She'd promised funds, then laughed at me, told me to perform for my supper as I do at cards. She was going to speak to Pembroke, warn every club to shut its door. One does not survive that. His eyes went to Clara, and for the first time there was something like shame. I needed only one more turn of the wheel. Alas, said Poirot, with a small, grave bow, you chose a turn that brings no man luck. Inspector Sharp stepped forward. Hugh Mortimer, I'm arresting you for the murder of Lady Evelyn Wickham. There followed the sober words of caution. Mortimer did not resist. His shoulders sagged, and the Poirot, melancholy to the last, allowed himself to be led away. Sir Reginald expelled a breath he might have been holding for an hour. Colonel Grant covered his eyes with a hand that trembled. Clara, suddenly very young, put her face in her fingers and wept soundlessly. Poirot looked toward the fountain where roses floated, bruised and beautiful. Masks, he said softly to me. They tempt the vain to think they are invisible. But the pattern, Hastings, the pattern is always visible to one who is patient. Outside, pale daylight gathered itself along the river. The first taxis of the morning sped like beetles across the bridge. The Savoy, exhausted and penitent, exhaled. "Come, mon ami," said Poirot. "We will take coffee. The new year begins."